On a winter evening, an elderly woman sat alone in her living room while an orange tabby house cat rested on the old grey rug by the heater. Most nights she warmed her hands around a mug and let the TV murmur. But lately the cat had been doing something different. It kept returning to that same worn rug, sitting still and staring toward the front door as if waiting. Tonight, when she rose to switch off the lamp, the cat stepped into her path and did not move. Tail low, eyes steady on her face. For years she had believed the house was emptying. Now, with her fingers tightening on the mug, she paused and followed the cat's gaze toward the dark hallway, wondering what it wanted her to see. The winter evening laid a thin blue light across the living room as Evelyn eased herself into her low armchair. The heater in the corner hummed its steady note, casting a soft glow over the old grey rug by the heater. Outside, the town had folded into silence. Even the mail truck was long gone. Inside, only the tick of the clock and the faint rush in her ears kept her company. She had just settled her aching knees when a faint scuff came from the hallway, the sound of something small changing its mind. The floorboard near the doorway gave a tiny creak, the same one she heard most nights now, right around dusk. Evelyn glanced up, heartbeat hitching, then shook her head and muttered that old houses like to talk when the temperature dropped. In the morning, pale sunlight spilled across the living room, showing everything too clearly. On her lap blanket, near the fold by her thumb, a few short, ginger-coloured strands clung to the fabric. She pinched them between her fingers, rolling them thoughtfully, then decided they must have come from an old sweater she barely remembered owning. Still, she brushed off her hands more carefully than usual. That afternoon, in the quiet space between the news and the game shows, she heard a different sound. A light tap against the empty ceramic bowl by the kitchen doorway. One tap, then another, like something had nudged it and recoiled. The fridge hummed on, and a car passed outside. Pipes, she told herself firmly, though there was no water running anywhere. Later in the week, she noticed a faint trail along the baseboard, a clean curve drawn through the dust where nothing should have passed. When she bent to swipe it with a cloth, her lower back tightened and a chill brushed the nape of her neck, as if a small breeze had slipped through an invisible crack. She straightened quickly, staring at the steel curtains, feeling foolish for watching them. The same hour the next day, that corner of the living room tugged at her attention. The old grey rug by the heater had one edge turned up, folded as neatly as if someone small had pushed it with purpose. She smoothed it flat with her foot, laughing once. Short and thin. "You're getting jumpy, Evie," she whispered, blaming her imagination and the long hours of quiet. One evening, she dozed off with the television murmuring low. In the soft half-sleep, Something brushed her ankle. A brief, definite pressure against her sock where it touched the rug. Warmth bloomed there. Unmistakable. She jerked awake, eyes wide, and saw nothing but the empty curve of the old grey rug by the heater. The pattern undisturbed except for a single deeper hollow in the fibres. By the end of that week, she realised the sounds and shifts always came just after 4, when the light slanted in across the rug and turned the room honey gold. Standing in the doorway, feeling the familiar prickle rise along her arms, she listened to the same small creak and the same faint tap, and finally whispered into the empty room. "All right then, if someone's here, just say so." The next afternoon, she sat without the television, letting the room stay quiet on purpose. The heater clicked on, its low breath filling the corner. Evelyn placed her mug carefully on the side table, listening for that soft scuff. When it came, the sound was clearer. A tiny rhythm of steps crossing the hardwood and stopping at the edge of the old grey rug by the heater. Her skin tightened, but she stayed still. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a flick of movement, a tail-like blur slipping behind her armchair. Her heart leaped, foolishly young for a moment. She turned her head too fast. The room was empty again, the hallway bare. You saw nothing. She scolded herself, pressing a hand over the thud in her chest. Maybe you just need stronger glasses. The following morning, she found the ceramic bowl no longer straight against the wall, but angled toward the living room. A few shallow scratches marking the floor nearby. When she picked it up, the faintest scent of something warm and dusty clung to its rim. Gone again before she could name it. She laid the bowl just beside the old grey rug by the heater, half as a test, half as a quiet invitation she would never admit out loud. Just after 4, the light fell in that familiar stripe. A small shape eased itself from the shadow of the hallway, and this time she saw it clearly. An orange tabby house cat, tail low, paws silent. It paused at the edge of the rug, amber eyes catching every glint of light. One delicate step onto the soft surface, then 2, and the cat sniffed the bowl, whiskers twitching. Evelyn barely breathed. Every part of her wanted to speak, to croon the way she had to her long ago animals, but her throat closed instead. The cat lifted its head, ears pricking toward her, and for a heartbeat their eyes met. Then a small jingle of something on its neck startled her, and her slight flinch was enough. The cat spun and vanished, tail streaking back down the hall. She sat for a long time afterward, fingers trembling slightly around her mug. Just a neighbour's stray, she told herself, though the cat had carried the sure weight of a creature who knew exactly where it was going. The bowl sat half a step onto the old grey rug by the heater, a single faint smear inside. as if a tongue had tested its emptiness. The next day, the pattern repeated. The soft steps, the careful pause at the rug, the quick touch of a pink tongue to the smooth ceramic. Evelyn had left a spoonful of chicken there, telling herself it would only go to waste otherwise. When the orange tabby house cat appeared, she watched its ribs move under the fur. Not thin, but not secure either, and something old and tender stirred in her chest. "Why here?" she whispered when it turned its head toward her for the second time in as many days. The cat's ears tilted, as if the sound of her voice was a familiar notch in the room. "Why now?" The cat finished the last trace of chicken, gave a tiny, satisfied huff, and retreated as before, leaving the rug, the bowl, and the quiet question hanging in the air. That night in bed, listening to the faint tick of the baseboard and the distant wind, Evelyn pressed her palm against her sternum where it ached in that dull, thoughtful way. A cat had stepped onto the old grey rug by the heater, as if it belonged to some memory she couldn't quite reach. She doubted herself all over again, wondering if loneliness could conjure fur and whiskers out of shadows, even when her fingers still smelled faintly of chicken. Long before it dared step fully into her living room, the orange tabby house cat had learned the back paths of the neighbourhood. It moved like a small ember through the alleys, slipping under porches and between stacked firewood, collecting scents of gasoline, damp leaves, and frying bacon from kitchen vents. Doors had opened and closed near it, but no one had yet said, "Stay." In late autumn of the previous year, when the wind cut sharper through the trees, it had found shelter beneath the leaning carport 2 streets over. An old man there scattered kibble without looking, his radio murmuring baseball scores into the dusk. The cat ate, grateful but wary, keeping one eye on the swinging door that sometimes slammed without warning. It never crossed the threshold. Thresholds could mean traps. When snow came heavy that winter, the cat made longer journeys, circling wider in search of warmth. Once, during a blow that turned the world to stinging white, it followed the smell of wood smoke and ended up in Evelyn's yard for the first time. Her house threw a square of golden light onto the snow, and the old grey rug by the heater was visible through the window, a soft island beyond the glass. The cat's whiskers crusted with frost as it huddled by the steps, breathing steam into its own pores. Inside, a tall man in a flannel shirt moved past the window, laughing at something Evelyn said, his shape familiar to the cat only as warmth in motion. The cat meowed once, a small, hopeful sound lost under the howl of the wind. No one heard. The man never appeared there again after that winter. In the spring, the cat vanished for a while, tucked under the eaves of a shed across town where a kindly woman left scraps from her diner job. There, under a tilted stack of pallets, it birthed a small litter, the tiny bodies wriggling like sparks against its belly. The woman never came too close, only watched from the doorway and murmured, "Good, Mama," before walking away to let nature figure the rest out. As the kittens grew and scattered, humans stepped in. One went home with a boy whose family had many hands and loud voices. Another followed a girl with a blue backpack and never returned. One ginger daughter found her way to a neat white house on Maple Street, where the porch always smelled of laundry soap and Sunday roasts. The orange tabby house cat watched from the hedge as its offspring was carried inside, heart squeezed tight and proud. After that, the cat's routes changed again. It walked past Evelyn's house more often, pausing at the front steps to listen. The window no longer showed the tall man, only Evelyn's smaller figure, moving slower now, setting single plates on a table built for two. Sometimes she sat on the old grey rug by the heater with her knees pulled in, staring at a framed photo in her hands until her shoulders shook once and stilled. The cat had learned human grief the way it learned weather, by its weight in the air. Houses that held too much of it often closed tight, smells going stale. But this house, for all its quiet, still opened its curtains each morning and clicked on its heater in the evening, brightening the rug where the light poured in. It felt like a place that might still say, "Stay," though the word had not yet been spoken. Evelyn had seen the orange tabby house cat in passing too, through bus windows and kitchen glass. For years she pretended not to. After her husband, Frank, died, she told herself she would not set another place at the table, even for an animal. She packed away the old toys her childhood pets had used and donated the scratching posts, telling her son she was done with goodbyes that arrived too soon. Yet each season the cat's path circled a little closer, and each season Evelyn's own quiet grew heavier inside her. Both carried old hesitations like invisible leashes. The cat distrusted doors that might close behind it. Evelyn distrusted her own heart, worried that it would not bear one more loss. By the time the cat finally dared put its paws on the old grey rug by the heater, the distance between them had narrowed to a single, fragile choice neither of them was quite ready to make. The afternoon the choice began to shift. The sky outside was thick with low clouds, pressing the daylight down to a soft grey. Evelyn warmed leftover stew on the stove and, on a sudden impulse, she did not examine, set a little of the broth into the ceramic bowl near the edge of the old grey rug by the heater. The steam curled upward in thin ribbons. She returned to her armchair and pretended to read, though her eyes kept sliding to the doorway. Right on cue, as if the town clock had chimed some secret hour. the orange tabby house cat appeared. It paused on the threshold, sniffing, the fur along its back rising slightly at the unfamiliar richness in the air. Its paws made no sound at all as it stepped onto the rug. This time, Evelyn spoke first. "You must be freezing," she said softly, as though commenting on the weather. The cat's ears twitched at the sound. It lowered its head, lapped once, then twice, and the soft click of tongue against ceramic was unexpectedly loud. Its tail curled around its feet, relaxed despite itself. She slid a little lower in her chair, making her body smaller, less looming. Her hand hung off the armrest, fingers loose. The cat glanced at it, eyes narrowing in consideration. For a heartbeat, it looked like every other hand that had reached and then closed. The cat had turned from many such hands. This one stayed still, tremor and all. Very slowly, the cat stepped closer, its paws pressing tiny valleys into the fibres of the old grey rug by the heater. It leaned forward, nostrils flaring, and touched its nose to the back of her hand. Warmth, and the faint smell of soap and paper, wrapped around the cat's senses. Evelyn's breath hitched, but she did not move. A single tear slipped past her defences, darkening the sleeve of her sweater. "Hello there," she murmured, once the cat had drawn back but not run. "You look like you've seen some things." She thought of Frank in his work coat, of the way he had once coaxed shy animals out from behind woodpiles with nothing but patience. The cat settled into a cautious loaf on the rug, as if testing how long it might be allowed to stay before the spell of safety broke. Over the next week, the pattern repeated, each visit a little longer. The cat explored the limits of the old grey rug by the heater, rarely venturing beyond its borders. Evelyn learned the sound of its small leaps, the weight of it settling beside her chair, the jingle of the thin metal tag on its worn collar. Once, she dared brush the air above its spine with her fingertips, and it did not bolt, only glanced back as if to say, "Careful." She began talking more. Not the baby nonsense she might have used years ago, but ordinary conversation. She told it about the neighbour's overgrown pine, about the mail carrier who always forgot to close her gate, about the ache in her hip that flared when the wind turned wet. The cat listened the way only animals do, fully, without interruption, eyes half lidded in the glow of the heater. One evening, feeling braver, Evelyn slid herself off the chair and sat cross-legged on the old grey rug by the heater. It protested under her joints, but there was a comfort in being on the same level. The cat considered her, then rose, padding over until its whiskers brushed her knee. It circled once, twice, and finally curled up against her shine. Its purr a low, surprising engine. She laughed, the sound rusty but real. "All right then," she said. "If you're going to claim the rug, I suppose you'll need a proper name." The colour of its fur reminded her of the maple tree out front that used to shed leaves all over Frank's truck. Margot, she decided aloud. The name felt right in her mouth, a mix of old and new. The cat flicked its ear, as if agreeing. The bond was still fragile, a thread they could both snap by spooking too fast. Yet as Evelyn sat there with Margot pressed warmly against her, the old grey rug by the heater beneath them felt less like a spot in a quiet house and more like the first tiny patch of shared ground in a life that had been too empty for too long. The first real snow of the year came down wet and heavy, slapping against the windows in clumps. Evelyn's son, Daniel, called that night, his voice buzzing through the kitchen phone while Margot dozed on the old grey rug by the heater. Daniel's words tumbled over one another. Bad roads, worrying about her, a listing real estate agent he knew in town. "Mum, that house is too much for you alone," he said. Evelyn traced the spiral of the phone cord with her finger, watching Margot twitch in her sleep. "It's just a house," she started to say, but the word caught. This was the hallway where Frank had hung his coat, the kitchen where they'd burned their first roast, the living room, with the rug and the heater, had been where they sat on late evenings, talking about nothing and everything. "I'm managing," she finished, not quite convincingly. Boxes appeared over the next week, delivered by Daniel on a rushed Saturday visit. He stacked them by the hall closet, his brow knit, talking about elevator buildings and emergency buttons, about neighbours close enough to hear if she fell. Margot watched from the old grey rug by the heater, eyes narrow, tail flicking whenever cardboard scraped the floor. When Daniel tried to coax her over, she slipped away, unsettled by the scent of change on his clothes. At night, Evelyn sat with a pen hovering over a folder of forms Daniel had left. Her name looked strange in the printed lines, like it belonged to someone else. Margot leaped lightly onto her lap, pressing her weight against the paper. Stubbornly, between Evelyn and the decision. "Oh, you," Evelyn sighed, scratching behind one orange ear. "You'd hate an apartment, wouldn't you? No steady birds to watch." Outside, the radio murmured forecasts of more storms, power flickers, and icy sidewalks. Evelyn's knees ached more now, her breath shorter on the stairs. She could hear Daniel's worry even when the phone was silent. Still, every time she thought of leaving, her chest tightened, not just with fear of the unknown, but with the sense of abandoning years that still lived in the walls. The old grey rug by the heater had become a little stage where her heart remembered how to unfurl again. Margot's behaviour began to change. She followed Evelyn more closely, shadowing her to the kitchen and back, keeping a steady watch during each phone call. She sat directly on the lids of half-packed boxes, her paws spread as if to pin them to the floor. When Evelyn set a photo album on top of one, Margot nudged it off with careful insistence, sending it thumping softly open on the carpet at Evelyn's feet. One afternoon, wind rattling the windows, Evelyn found Margot sitting bolt upright on the old grey rug by the heater, eyes fixed on the front door. It was only 3:30, not quite the magic hour of their first meetings, but the cat's focus was unshakable. "No one's coming, darling," Evelyn murmured, settling into her chair. Her own heart, however, sped up, sensing a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. The next day brought freezing rain, glazing the porch, steps in dangerous glass. Daniel called again, more insistent than before. "We should move the timeline up," he said. "I can come next weekend. Well, sign papers. Get you somewhere safer before the deep freeze." Evelyn's hand shook so much she had to sit, lowering herself toward the familiar warmth of the old grey rug by the heater. Margot pressed herself against her calf, as if anchoring her. When she hung up, the house seemed to hold its breath. The stack of boxes loomed larger, like silent arguments she had already lost. Margot paced the rug, from heater to doorway and back again, emitting small, questioning chirps under her breath. "I don't know," Evelyn told her, voice breaking. "Staying means winter storms and icy walks. Leaving means leaving you, or making you an indoor girl and hoping you forgive me." That night the lights flickered twice, the second time long enough for the room to go entirely dark. Evelyn sat frozen, measuring her breaths, while the heater clicked reluctantly back to life. In the dim orange glow that followed, she could see Margot's outline on the rug, eyes shining, not with fear, but with something like urgent anticipation. The question of leaving weighed heavier than ever, pressing down on both of them until Evelyn felt she could hardly inhale. By morning, the power was steady again, but nothing inside her had settled. Daniel expected an answer. The paperwork waited like a closed door she hadn't yet opened. As she stood in the doorway sipping coffee, Margot once more took up her post on the old grey rug by the heater, gaze pinned to the front door as though something unseen approached. "What are you waiting for?" Evelyn whispered, wondering if her own life was also poised on the edge of an arrival she did not yet understand. The storm that finally came wasn't the howling blizzard the radio had warned about, but a dense, steady snow that swallowed the street in white and blurred the outlines of the neighbouring houses. Afternoon light melted into early evening without much difference. Evelyn tucked the signed papers into a manila envelope, still unmailed, and rested it on the coffee table. Her hand hovered over it, reluctant to let go. Margot was restless from the moment the first flakes fell. She trotted from window to window, claws ticking softly on the wood floor, tail switching. Several times she returned to the old grey rug by the heater, sat staring at the door, then paced back to Evelyn with a soft, insistent trill. "No one's coming in this mess," Evelyn told her, though some small, unreasonable part of her wished they would. Around 4, the headlights of a single car cut through the thickening snow, twin beams gliding slowly past the front window. Margot froze, then darted to the rug, planting herself squarely in the centre as if to claim the spot. Evelyn's heart thudded painfully. Few people drove on their street unannounced anymore. Most of her friends no longer drove at all. A moment later, the knock came 3 firm raps that sent a shiver through the quiet house. Evelyn's knees protested, but she made her way to the door. When she opened it, cold air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of snow and exhaust. Daniel stood on the porch, dusted white, his cheeks red from the cold. Beside him, his teenage daughter, Hannah, cradled a small bundle wrapped in a faded towel. "Mum," Daniel said, stepping inside quickly. "Roads are rough, but we made it. I didn't want to wait to talk about everything." His gaze flicked to the unopened envelope on the table, then back to her face. Hannah's eyes, bright and nervous, darted toward the living room where Margot now stood tall on the old grey rug by the heater, fur puffed with attention. "What's all this?" Evelyn asked, breath fogging in the doorway. Hannah unwrapped the towel just enough for a tiny, blinking face to appear. A minute orange kitten, ears still a bit too big for its head, pawing at the air with clumsy determination. Its fur was the same warm maple shade as Margot's, but softer, like new leaves. Evelyn's throat tightened. "We weren't going to bring her today," Daniel admitted, shrugging snow from his coat. "But when the storm started, Hannah insisted we come anyway. She said we couldn't wait." Hannah stepped forward carefully, as if approaching a sacred place, and knelt at the edge of the old grey rug by the heater. Margot barely moved, eyes wide, whiskers quivering. Very slowly, Hannah set the tiny kitten down on the rug. The little creature wobbled, sat, and let out a surprisingly bold squeak. Margot lowered her head until their noses nearly touched. For a long, breathless moment, nothing else existed in the room but that gentle meeting. Old and new, past and future, whiskers and soft pink mouths breathing the same warm air. "She's from Maple Street," Daniel said quietly beside Evelyn. "The neighbour with the white house. Her cat had a litter. She swears this little one's mother is the ginger stray that used to sleep under her porch years ago. The same stray she says she once saw in your yard during that bad winter when Dad was still." He trailed off. Swallowing, we realised that must have been Margot. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. The memory clicked into place. That flash of orange under the snow-laden hedge. The meow no one heard. "So that would make her," Hannah supplied softly, eyes shining. "Margot's Grandkitten. I guess. Your cat's first grandbaby." The word felt odd and perfect at once, stretching generations from the rug straight into Evelyn's chest. Margot sniffed the kitten again. Then, with a tenderness that made Evelyn's eyes sting, began to groom the tiny head in slow, deliberate strokes. The kitten wobbled closer, pressing its body into Margot's chest. A small, complete trust. The old grey rug by the heater held them both. Orange fur against orange fur. Steam from the heater curling around them like a blessing. In that quiet, Evelyn understood what Margot's restless watching had been about. At least in her own heart. The cat had stood guard at the door of a future Evelyn had been too afraid to imagine. A life not shrinking, but making room for something new. The papers on the table suddenly felt less like safety and more like surrender. She reached for them, fingers steady, and tore them cleanly in half. Daniel stared for a heartbeat, then laughed, the sound echoing oddly in the small room. "So you're staying," he said, relief washing over his features. "Then we'll just have to make this place safer. That's all. Rails on the steps. Maybe a neighbour to check on you." Hannah grinned, scooping the kitten up for a moment before setting her back down where Margot waited. Evelyn sank slowly onto the old grey rug by the heater, knees creaking, and laid a gentle hand on Margot's back, another near the kitten's tiny flank. Warmth spread from fur into her palms, into the ache in her bones, into spaces in her heart she had thought were permanently hollow. The snow kept falling outside, but inside, surrounded by 3 generations of her family, 2-legged and 4, she felt something inside her unclench at last. In the weeks that followed, the storm's memory faded into neighbourhood stories, but the impression of that evening remained pressed into the fibres of the old grey rug by the heater. Margot took to lying there most afternoons with the tiny kitten bundled against her side, the two orange shapes forming a lazy, breathing comma at the centre of the room. Evelyn learned to move more slowly around them, careful not to disturb the punctuation of her own contentment. The kitten, whom Hannah officially named Penny, came to stay on long weekends and during school breaks. Each arrival was announced by the crunch of tyres on the street and an excited squeal that drifted up the walk. Margot would be waiting on the rug before the car even stopped, tail high, ears forward. Penny barreled through the doorway moments later, skidding onto the rug in a tumble of paws and joy, greeted by patient licks and a firm, instructive swat when she overstepped. Evelyn's days shifted into new rhythms. There were medications still, and careful steps on frosty mornings. But there were also toys to chase under the coffee table and tiny food bowls to fill beside Margot's larger one. The mail carrier started leaving cat-shaped stamps on her letters, and the neighbour across the way would wave whenever she saw Evelyn brushing two ginger coats in the strip of light by the window. The house no longer felt like a quiet museum. It sounded softly lived in. On fair weather afternoons, Hannah helped install a handrail by the front steps while Daniel shoveled grit into the slickest spots. Inside, Penny practiced climbing the back of Evelyn's armchair, launching herself toward Margot on the old grey rug by the heater in daring, wobbly leaps. Margot bore it all with a long-suffering dignity that melted into play when she thought no one was looking, batting mouse toys across the rug while Penny pounced. Sometimes, when evening settled in and the streetlights blinked on, Evelyn would sit on the floor with them, knees cushioned by an extra pillow. Margot would claim her lap. Penny, not yet understanding the concept of personal space, would sprawl over both of them, tiny paws kneading the air. The heater's steady breath warmed their trio, and the sound of dual purrs vibrated through Evelyn's bones like a song written especially for old hearts. Neighbours started stopping her at the mailbox or in the aisle of the small-town grocery store. "Heard you've got yourself quite the pair," they'd say. Smiling, Evelyn would pull out her phone, a habit shed picked up from Hannah, and show them pictures of Margot and Penny on the old grey rug by the heater. One with wise, golden eyes, the other a blur of mischief. More than once, someone remarked that the house looked different now, brighter, even in photographs. One late afternoon, as a light rain tapped gently at the windows, Evelyn watched Margot and Penny bathe side by side on the rug. Penny copied every motion, lifting her paw when Margot did, turning her head at the same angle. It struck Evelyn then that legacy wasn't only held in photographs or heirlooms, but also in gestures, rituals, the way one life quietly taught another how to move through a room without breaking anything important. The old grey rug by the heater had become their classroom, their stage, and their shared confession bench. By the time spring loosened winter's grip, the maple tree in front of the house had begun to bud, tiny green flags unfurling against the pale sky. Sunlight stretched deeper into the living room now, pooling warmly over the old grey rug by the heater, even when the heater itself sat silent. Margot sprawled in that sun with queenly ease, while Penny, nearly grown but still reckless, traced wild circles around her before collapsing in a heap nearby. Evelyn's joints still complained on rainy mornings, and she still sometimes reached for the second coffee mug she no longer needed. Old habits from the years with Frank. But when those old aches of memory rose, there was usually a soft weight against her calf or a small, warm body pressing into the crook of her arm on the rug. Grief, she discovered, could share space with purring. It didn't have to be evicted, only softened. On Sundays, Hannah would sit cross-legged beside her, phone in hand, recording short clips of Margot grooming Penny on the old grey rug by the heater. "I'm making a little series," she explained. 3 generations. You, Margot, and Penny. People love stories like that. Evelyn smiled at the idea of their quiet life travelling beyond the small-town streets, comforting strangers she would never meet. Sometimes, when visitors came, Evelyn would tell the story of the winter storm and the unsigned papers, of the knock on the door and the first time Margot met her Grandkitten on that patch of worn fibres. Shed gesture toward the rug, where the 2 ginger cats almost always lay within touching distance of each other. This spot used to feel so empty. Shed say, "Now I trip over love just trying to cross the room." On a mild evening, when the windows were open and the distant sound of a lawnmower drifted in, Evelyn settled herself carefully onto the old grey rug by the heater. Margot curled along her hip. Penny stretched across her shins, paws twitching in some gentle dream. The house breathed around them. Fridge humming, floor ticking as it cooled, a faint bird song from the maple outside. Evelyn rested her hand on both warm backs and let her eyes close for a moment. Not in escape, but in gratitude. She had not left this house. Instead, life had found its way back in, 1 orange tabby and 1 Grandkitten at a time, until the quiet rooms felt full again. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments to let us know you were here. Your support keeps these gentle stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story might just be the one that finds you when you least expect it.